Good afternoon and welcome. It's fantastic to see you joining us today. Uh, we're part of the Nottingham Tech for Good Festival. My name is Paul Bailey, and I'm one of the team behind the festival. It's a grassroots initiative that started out as a little idea back in October, and it's really blossomed over the last few weeks. It's really grown a lot, and in particular, the 4 days of the festival, which started on Tuesday, covered 20 events, and we've had over 600 people sign up for the sessions. We've still got some sessions as well tomorrow, but we've got a really interesting session today with Pat Brundle, who's been doing some fascinating research, and I'm really keen to hear more about it. So I'm going to introduce you to Pat, and I will disappear. So Pat, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Pat Brundle. I'm a research fellow, professional postdoc at the Mixed Reality Lab and Horizon Digital Economy Research Centre at the University of Nottingham. And my background is psychology, biology, but mostly I'm involved in the design and evaluation of interactive technologies for the arts, museums, and also healthcare. But significantly, for me, and probably everyone who knows me, I'm also late diagnosed ADHD and inattentive type. So I do have a tendency, so forgive me if I talk too quickly or I go off on a tangent. I'll try to stay on track for this, for the presentation. So the background to the project I'm going to talk about is kind of from some questions that you might like to consider. So can physical experiences improve well-being? And how personalized do these physical experiences need to be? I mean, we all like a hug. So I'm part of the Horizon Digital Economy Research Institute. This has been running at the University of Nottingham. I can't remember exactly how many years now, a while. But it kind of brings together an interdisciplinary team from a wide variety of backgrounds: computer science, engineering, psychology, and the arts, all with the overall encompassing aim of designing and evaluating and supporting consumer and, well, the digital economy in all its multifarious forms. The project I'm going to talk about is part of the recent welfare campaign, and this is a bunch of projects aimed at establishing technology, methodologies, and toolkits that actively promote personalized digital health and a consumer welfare agenda. So our project, which I'm leading, is called Soma Co-Design Technology for Wellbeing, and there's a big and wonderful team who are all equally important in the design and delivery of this project. Most of us are computer science, but we've got a mental health and a bunch of different backgrounds. And the key about this project is identifying key factors which impact the physical, mental, and social well-being of people who may have atypical sensory, communicative, cognitive, and emotion processing requirements. So we basically are delivering and evaluating a set of design workshops which are focused on embodied sensory experiences, and trying to address the needs of people who are often not necessarily excluded, but not considered in design processes because they are a minority. So just a little bit of background. Embodiment is a contested kind of concept, but essentially it is all about the somatic awareness of your thoughts and feelings. So the felt sense of being a human. It's all about the internal. It comes from internal physical and emotional states, and sensations which come together to give us our sense of our conscious, sentient self in the present moment. It's a product of internal physiological states of the body. So whether we feel itchy, scratchy, how much our joints ache, things like that, but also some, as they call, proprioceptive feelings, the body in relation to the world. So how we are in the space. So if you want to balance on something, you need to have good proprioceptive sense so that you know where your body is in the world in relation to gravity and such like. But it also encompasses the autonomic and hormonal systems. So your heart rate, your whether or not you're feeling sweaty or anxious and those kinds of things. And that also includes the emotional feelings that you may be having. So they're kind of internally generated. But so what has this got to do with well-being? Well, internal states, there's a long history of understanding that internal states can be influenced and regulated by physical activity. Everyone that's done yoga or running or any of these kinds of other activities know that they have a big impact on people's well-being, and they've also been utilized and continue to be utilized in therapies and all sorts of other activities. So designing with the body in mind, a fairly new approach to design has been to bring on board some of the ideas about embodiment in something called Soma design. And this has been developed as a building on Somaesthetic concepts. So Somaesthetic interaction design practice has been developed by Christina Hook, a Swedish prof. And it takes on board that the idea of the different sensory qualities of physical and digital materials and our bodies can be brought together in the design process to enrich and individualize embodied experiences. So it is built on an appreciation that the faculty of our own bodily perception is important in interaction design. So it foregrounds the lived experience of the designer, and the designer is encouraged to focus on their body and think about how this impacts design and is impacted by design. And it contrasts with many more traditional design practices in human-computer interaction, but also many design practices which focus on thinking, the cognitive and visual senses. So it's a holistic approach. It's the idea is it breaks down the division between the mind and body and understands that our mind is influenced by our body and our body is influenced by our mind. So the aim is not to analyze lived experiences, but just to feel it, to design for it, alter it, and bring users on a journey where their experiences are woven into a whole. Interestingly and importantly, it's also about the aesthetics, the aesthetic experience of design. So why in particular might body-focused design improve well-being in our chosen group of for participation of ADHD people? So I've got a personal interest in ADHD, so that was one of the motivations for thinking about them. But ADHD is characterized in differences in executive functioning, so memory, decision making, those kinds of sort of cognitive processes. But also diagnosed with people have high impulsivity and difficulties or variations in emotional regulation. But importantly, there's also a variation very commonly in sensory sensitivity. So in terms of the welfare campaign from Horizon, ADHD is very much characterized by poor well-being. There's an increased risk for skin disorders, skin complaints, sleep problems, all sorts of different physical disorders, but very much increased risk of educational underachievement, difficulties in social relationships, and sadly, and very commonly, because approximately 75% of ADHD people have psychiatric co-occurrence, generally anxiety disorder and depression, and much higher rates of suicide and self-harm, like many other neurodivergent conditions, unfortunately. So, um, and this is a big group of people. There's something like 300 million estimated ADHD people in the world. It's about 5% of the population. And many of the neurodivergent conditions such as autism, dyslexia, and ADHD are often overlapping and very much co-occurring. It's often undiagnosed and untreated. So I didn't get a diagnosis till I was over 50. I know I look very much younger than that, but I am very old. And people with ADHD tend to be engaged in lots of self-care. And in terms of horizon and the population, so consumer devices are used a lot in self-care, and the design of them is important. So ADHD is characterized by sensory processing sensitivity very often. So that can be light, sounds, textures, tastes, smells, and a sensory processing sensitivity often means hypersensitive, but it doesn't always. It can mean undersensitive as well. But it tends to mean that people process sensory stimuli and information more strongly and deeply than is found in much of the general population. So, but it also means increased sensitivity to processing of emotions, pain, and interestingly, aesthetic experiences. So, Soma design, focusing on bodily experiences and the aesthetics of design, is particularly attuned to perhaps help the design interactions and experiences for ADHD people and help their well-being, improve their well-being. ADHD people obviously often self-regulate with sensory experiences, so fidget toys and such like are very commonly used. So stimming and fidgeting, breathing exercises, calming sounds or environments can help with well-being by reducing overstimulation for a lot of people. But also ADHD people conversely can be sensation seekers, and which can help to stimulate neurotransmitters and, for instance, with me, help with procrastination, which is a perpetual problem of moving from one state to another in ADHD. So this is just a quick guide about stimming, but stimming is often about helping people to soothe. So, and it kind of contrasts with fidgeting, which is in ADHD often about a tendency to want to release energy, but both can help focus, which is a problem with many ADHD people. So Soma design is intended to be a design for all, and we perhaps are looking at a new agenda. So there's lots of opportunities and challenges for designers of digital experiences. And certainly with ADHD, this is part of a new agenda where instead of designing for curing disorders, the neurodiversity movement is very much focused on the idea that instead of having deficits and conditions which need curing, there are opportunities and other positives that can be encouraged through careful and good design. Good design, certainly in Soma design, and human-computer interaction is very much seen as the greater involvement in the design of products and services, there are all sorts of benefits. So solo designers can design great stuff, but there's been a movement towards participatory design and usability of products and services with end users to help them be designed to fit their intended use much better. And co-design is the kind of almost the ultimate in participatory design, where participants and often the researchers are all part of the same design activity. So it's creative cooperation during the design process. So centering the experiences and requirements of ADHD people is responsible research and innovation, and it's also likely to result in more originality and innovative and designs and better match users' needs. So how do we create bodily sensations and consider them in design? Tricky. So to do this, we engaged in two related Soma co-design workshops. So over 2 days, we had 10 participants who self-diagnosed or self-declared as ADHD. We didn't do any kind of medical assessments of them. And in these workshops, they explored bodily sensations and their relationship to well-being through some sensitizing activities and playing with simple controllable electronics and a range of non-interactive materials. And non-interactive by means non-electronic or kind of objects, basically. So the idea was to create as many sensory experiences as we could possibly manage in a safe space. And those sensory experiences tended to be focused on tactile senses and sense of touch and movement rather than things like sounds or light. But we did explore those a little bit. We tried to explore and record what people's physical and mental experiences were. And this was a real challenge. How do you go about recording somebody's physical and mental experience? It's quite difficult. So we explored a bunch of different ways. So body maps, something called somatic trajectories, emotion and sensation mapping. And the kind of overall aim of the workshops was to try and get people to design and develop interactive devices which might improve their well-being based on a reflection of their ADHD, but based on these physical sensations that they had experienced during the workshops. And we also got them to record their design decisions and the processes by which they came to the designs through diaries, photos, notes, and all sorts of discussions. So the simple controllable electronics was a bunch of stuff that that I've been building and terming Somatronics. Now these have been a kind of extension of something from Soma that's been used in Soma design a lot, called Soma bits. But these were intended to be a bit more modular and more configurable. So the idea is really you take an Arduino microprocessor computer, can have inputs and outputs, and you stick into it a bunch of different inputs. So those in this slide, there's a picture of a pressure sensor, so you can measure air pressure or somebody blowing down a tube, something like that. And also a flexible sensor there, so the more it bends, it changes the electrical input, but often it's just switches and dials that just can change an input. The Arduino does some processing and then creates an output which can be used to control in anything. But in our case, we tried to create wearable output devices to induce physical sensations. So heat pads, so to induce heating, cooling, vibrating, inflating, pressure, blowing. So we used some fans, and we had inflatable devices, and we also had lots of vibrating and heating and cooling devices. So during the workshop, we basically provide a whole bunch of these things and encourage people to mix and match and join them together with the non-interactive devices, so textiles and the other objects, and try and get people to come up with novel ways of experiencing sensations. So for our novel devices, this is only a small selection because we had a huge number of inflatables, mats, all sorts of stuff. So we had kinetic sand and different kinds of touch devices, stretchy things, different textures of plastics and materials, and exercise stretch bands and marbles, all sorts of stuff. And the idea was basically to just get people to play with them and experience them. So how do we get people to focus on their body and record what and how these sensations make them feel? So in common with lots of Soma design workshops, we got an expert facilitator, Christine Lee, who did something called a body scan. It's a bit like yoga. It looked like yoga to me. So the participants were encouraged to focus on the somatic sensations they experienced while they were taken through an appreciation of their body while standing, lying, or sitting on yoga mats. And then we used body maps to get people to record how they felt before and after. So in this example here, this person is feeling all sorts of stuff in their head, their thoughts. She was thinking music throughout the experience, but also stuff to do with her mouth and her teeth and her knees and her hands. So, her feet and her hands. So we're kind of exploring these ways of recording bodily experiences, but we also kind of believed that experiences can change over time, and that's obviously part of the design process, is hopefully that we design things that impact on people's well-being or their feelings. So we used something developed by Paul Tennant called Soma trajectories, where it's an attempt to record how an experience changes over time, depending on sometimes events or what you've been doing. So we encourage people to think about the design process with an overall theme of stillness and motion, which seemed to really appropriate for ADHD, because ADHD people sometimes want to be still and they can't, or they struggle to be still, but also they can also struggle sometimes to get into motion when they are already still. So it sort of had a lot of interesting aspects about ADHD in it. So they were encouraged to experience the sensations from the Somatronics, lots of toys that we brought, sensory materials, inflatable. We also had a virtual reality experience and a TENS machine that people could try out. And they're encouraged to try and combine these materials to create personalized devices for themselves and in groups around the concepts of stillness and motion. So we gave them instant cameras, crafting and arts materials to help them record the design processes and reflect on how the designs related to the ADHD. And we were really hoping and that people would create material prototypes. And we had a whole team of people helping with building things, playing with the electronic devices, and many of the research teams, sorry, not just me, are also neurodivergent. So everyone who was at the workshop was encouraged to take part in the activities. So this is a kind of some pictures of what people were doing. So that's somebody using a small vibrating device on their wrist, and playing with all the different things that we had arranged throughout the room, like textiles and marbles and stretchy things and all that kind of stuff. So we really wanted people to produce design diaries to show a journey about how they came to their design decisions. And we've been exploring a whole bunch of different ways of doing that. So in this example, the person was showing how they designed some kind of vibrating and tactile sensing devices for their wrists to be worn on the wrists as bracelets. And in this design diary, it kind of also gives some sense about the sorts of feelings that they were having. So the pressure that they might felt, whether it was important that how things felt in a tactile sense. We also got people to try and record how the different experiences that they experienced, not only what they designed, but we got everyone to show and tell. So people played with each other's designs, and they basically then used a whole range of different things that we were tools and metrics that we were trying to explore which would be most appropriate. So in this case, an emotion sensation wheel, which was very went down very well. So we got people to do the crafting, prototyping, drawing, sketching, and actually building the stuff with devices. So there's a bunch of designs here which are kind of explored verbally and visually, but also some small things were made out of pipe cleaners and such like to kind of illustrate what the sorts of design they were thinking of. And then this other one, it was some wearable devices were sewn into textiles, and the person then sort of explored what kind of design of a t-shirt that they wanted to create that would have controllable vibrating and other electronic sort of activation within the textile thing. And we ended up with a showing, reflecting, and lots of group discussions where we played with each other's designs. And between the two parts of the design activity, the two workshops, we also kind of tried to develop some of the ideas that people had come up with in the first workshop, turn them into tangible objects so that people could then experience them in a bit more realistic way in the second workshop. So there's a picture there of somebody standing on a vibrating platform, which more than one person had described as being something they particularly enjoyed doing, feeling vibration and different sensations through their feet. So ultimately, we ended up with lots of devices that people made focused on their hands, wrists and feet, and those sensations that they experienced and described as being important for their well-being were often vibrating, but also cooling and heating. So a kind of sense of equilibrium that they experience through their hands, wrists, and feet. It's very important to a number of people, the sensation of squeezing that they wanted, and they had the urge to squeeze themselves, and having devices that would do it for them were often experienced and described as having quite strong calming effect. So it seemed to help people with focus and overstimulation. So we found in general that lots of the devices were about calming from overstimulation. So people wanted devices that allowed them to discreetly stim or fidget to try and either use up excess energy or control their mental states. So people wanted things in their shoes or on their wrists, things that they could do where potentially they could do it at any time they needed to, but the general population wouldn't necessarily be watching them. And that kind of, you know, reveals how impactful the stigma around unusual behaviors can feel for people in minoritized group. So they wanted clever devices some of the time which would detect when their stress levels or were building up and try and offset them before they caused a major impact on their well-being. But they also wanted devices which would try and induce a feeling of some of the things that they would do when they were self-caring. So if people did fidgeting or stimming, they they believed that certain devices might be able to actually induce that in the body without them having to do it. So they would then be free to carry on in their normal day-to-day activities. So people wanted things inside their shoes or under their clothes that would kind of squeeze them or stimulate them with the TENS machine. So lots of people had a lot of experiences, valuable experiences with the TENS machine. They wanted to use the TENS machine, which basically induces muscle contractions. So rhythmic muscle contractions were seen as something that was kind of replicated some of the rhythmic stimming or fidgeting activities that ADHD people do. They thought that if they could have a device to do it, that might also detect when they were feeling anxious through heart rate or something like that, and then do it automatically to kind of help with their well-being. But everyone also enjoyed full body experience. So we had a lot of fun and development of whole body cocooning type experiences. So a dry bath filled with kinetic sand, sound, lights, and soft textures all combining together to produce a kind of entirely immersive experience for, again, calming and sort of regulation. So people wanted recreations of sitting outside in the sun. They wanted the sun on them, smells, all those kinds of things. Unfortunately, we weren't able to explore smell in the workshop, but maybe that's for another time. So conclusions. It was really important that we had space for design and freedom for people to be the way they wanted to be. And in that sense, it kind of really talked to a kind of agenda of equity and inclusivity, where we did our very best to create a physical and mental space where participants could openly discuss their lived experience. And that was important to get them to be free to design and talk about their experiences. But we tried not to put pressure on them about creating data. So we didn't constantly interview them, constantly take photographs. People were free to record, take pictures of what they wanted to take pictures of. Be pretty free in terms of taking breaks, which was really important. And anyone planning on these kinds of workshops need to really know your participants and what kind of way of living they have. So people in this ADHD workshops really dived in and out. Sometimes they needed some quiet time, and other times they would just be full of energy, and that's very typical neurodivergent behavior. So the idea was to be very non-judgmental, and one of the participants really kind of summed it up in our final discussions about that. He said this was the first time since he got diagnosed that he was allowed to be himself and to lean into that experience of talking and designing and being open, because I've still got to go to my day-to-day life and work and be normal in Sainsbury's, as he put it. So allowing participants to control what they recorded and did and the activities was really quite important. That also meant that our sensitizing activities modified between the two different workshops. And again, it's something that people really have to focus on, exactly what they get people to do as activities. But managing this flexibility was really important, so that everyone could stay on task for enough time to be productive. And, classically getting a whole bunch of people with ADHD to focus on something and not go off in 50,000 different directions, it was quite tricky. So it really helped having some organized neurotypical people to help with the herding of these cats. So next steps, we're going to run some more workshops, possibly children with ADHD. We're going to develop the prototypes that have already come up, hopefully for an exhibition towards the end of the year at Citia's lab, which is a kind of design and community space at Castle Meadow campus, which is part of the University of Nottingham. So feel free to get in touch with me if you want any more information, and I'll be really happy to engage with people. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Pat. If you've got a question for Pat, do you want to just pop something in the chat? I'm going to kick some questions off, Pat. One of the reasons I'm really excited about getting you along to the Nottingham Tech for Good Festival is I have 4 kids, and 2 of them are neurodivergent. One of them's got ADHD. And my wife is a Senko. So we have lots of conversations around ADHD and the challenges of dealing with that. But as I don't have ADHD, it's been a real learning curve to try and understand and support and help. So I was really fascinated by the research that you've been doing. One of the things that I guess I'm curious about is what have you kind of learned? That session sounded like it was really hands-on and it was really probably quite intense. But what were the key kind of things the key things you've kind of taken away from that experience?
I think the key thing was that absolutely individualized experiences was important. That one thing that was pleasurable or people felt was calming or invigorating or something was absolutely did not speak to some other people. And so really felt like a design process that began with those people's individual experiences was really important. And so I'm sure lots of things are designed in the world that, well, obviously they are, that we can kind of all enjoy, but it really felt like in these sorts of specialist areas, perhaps more so than others, the kind of engaging people right from the beginning of the process was really important in getting something that might be built that would be really work for them. And of course, that's a challenge in terms of designing and building, because how do you build lots of objects that are all incredibly configurable to every individual? It's not, there's obviously a balance to be struck, but and there were certainly commonalities in the kind of designs that people came up with. And I was quite surprised at how little there was in the way of spinning. So lots of fidget spinners and things like that are often designed for people with ADHD, but people in our design workshops didn't really talk about those kinds of things much. They seem to want lots of things that vibrated or squeezed them, or kind of warmed and cooled them, which I found a little surprising, but it was great.
Yeah, no, a lot of the kind of fidget toys that my kids have had have definitely had a kind of spinning uh,
Yeah, yeah,
element to them, at least the favorites, or something
yeah,
like they can. One of my children has got a ring, but it's got like a thing that spins around on it, so she
yeah.
can kind of use that in a kind of subtle way, but it's always there. It's not something she's
Mm.
looking for.
But
Did,
maybe for more interactive things. So people talked about having those kinds of things like a ring or a bracelets, but that also did stuff so it might sense their anxiety or heart rate and kind of alert them to, uh, because ADHD and neurodivergence in general, people sometimes have a difficulty in recognizing their own internal states at times. So you can get anxious or get hungry or tense or angry without really knowing where this has emerged from. And so people kind of seem to like the idea that they could have some devices that would do some of that interpreting job for them. It's got a ring that will tell you that your maybe goes bright red or something when it's basically your heart rate is going through the roof, um, and
so it's
alert you
almost
to the fact that you need to do something about it,
it's
like
almost giving
like
you some
leave the room.
sensory
Yeah,
sensory
yeah.
feedback.
So it's
Yeah,
both recording uh, and creating sensory experiences. So sort of the input and output was seemed to be quite important for people.
yeah. And I particularly found the whole Soma design approach fascinating because I've not come across it before. Uh, but it's really interesting when you start to think, I think particularly where we are now with design and kind of moving beyond just purely pressing of buttons and actually trying to understand how people are feeling before, during, and after. We've got very basic tools, haven't we, in design, like journey maps that is a
Yeah.
happy or a sad type of thing. You get into Soma, there's like a whole new
Oh,
space
it's
of
so very much more in depth. And I think there are some uh certainly for me it doesn't come naturally to me to sort of take my shoes off and lie on yoga mat and get in touch with my body. But it's surprising what you can encourage people to do, and actually they can get some real benefits out of it and come up with different stuff that they maybe would never have thought of in the first place. So it's exciting, but there's lots of Soma design work going on now in the computer science and mixed reality lab at University of Nottingham and Horizon, um, being driven by various people. So Steve Benford, Paul Tennant, and other people that are involved in our project are heavily involved in Soma design too. It's great.
yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing. Have you any resources or websites or things if people are interested in
Mm.
Soma? Is there any recommendations?
Well, some of the kind of just trying to think off the top of my head. I'm trying to avoid just pointing people at research papers. Um, uh, but yeah, I'm kind of any contact with the mixed reality lab at the university now will almost certainly have the websites in a state of kind of updating at the moment. So I'm not quite sure exactly what's actually on the web at the moment. But there's a big project, fellowship project being run by Professor Steve Benford, who runs the mixed reality lab at the moment, called around somaesthetic design of interaction with robots. And so there's a lot of people working on this stuff, and with the collaborative, it's called the Cobot Makerspace. So collaborative robot lab, which is also linked to computer science in Nottingham, is doing lots of stuff to do with Soma design and robotics and AI. So yeah, I'm
I
sure.
think I'll be doing some Googling after this to find
The,
out a little bit more.
yeah, there's all sorts of workshops that have been going on, bringing in creatives to do uh, Soma design and also utilize the kind of like some of the very expensive and equipment that they've got there for people to play with.
Yeah. So we're up on time. Thanks again, Pat, for joining us today.
Not
It's
at
only
all. I
through
hope it was good.
people like yourself that are contributing that we've got a Nottingham Tech for Good festival at all. I'm really fascinated by the research that you've got, and definitely I've got more things to go away, I think, and learn a little bit more about.
That's
So if
great.
you
Thank you.
No, thank you. We've got a few more events, so we've got a day and a half left of the festival. Later on today, we've got lightning talks, which is in BGSS office in Nottingham, and we've also got a couple of talks left tomorrow. If you want to have a look, if you check out the website, it's www.nt4g.org/schedule, and you see there's probably about 5 or 6 events before the end of the week. But thank you for joining us today, and thanks again, Pat, for a really, really interesting talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye.
Bye.